In this video, we're going to speak about central banks and the foreign exchange parities. In a floating exchange rate system, the value of most currencies depends on an equilibrium in markets. The price of the euro in dollars, the dollar in sterling, the euro in yen, the yen in dollars, etc., varies constantly depending on the transactions made in dealing rooms. Despite this, large central banks that issue currencies and set the level of short-term interest rates have often influenced the market if by chance they find that speculation brings their currencies too low or too high. Central banks can intervene directly in markets by buying or selling foreign currency, sometimes alone or for greater efficiency, jointly with the central bank of the other country concerned. This type of intervention was very common in the 90s and even the 2000s, but it's scarce now because the market is usually stronger than the central banks, and some countries are now trying to have an even more undervalued currency to boost exports. For example, we've seen that the Swiss National Bank intervened by setting a maximum price for its currency against the euro. The SNB kept the level of 120 Swiss francs for 1 euro, so that its currency wouldn't appreciate too much compared to competing currencies. But in 2015, the SNB scrapped the cap and the price of the Swiss franc soared. It had disastrous consequences. Beyond that, it's natural to wonder what other criteria used by investors to buy and sell currencies in the market. To say that the dollar is strong, what does that mean? What does it mean when we say that prices in the market are above or below their true value? To evaluate an equilibrium exchange rate, a whole range of economic indicators must be analysed. In particular, the differences in inflation between the two countries, the interest rate spreads, and their balance of payments. If we take a country with a large unfavourable trade balance and a balance of payments with a huge deficit, the value of its currency will have to depreciate. Why? Because the value of the currency has to change to rebalance the financing of economies, and a deficit of payments must bring down the value of a currency. But there are other macroeconomic factors which may support one currency over another. So in order to determine whether a currency is overvalued, it's necessary to determine what is known as the equilibrium exchange rate. While all economists generally agree on the determinants of currency exchange rates, there are many different macroeconomic models used, and they don't always give the same results. So to conclude, there's never a single unambiguous measure of an undervaluation or the overvaluation of a currency. But there are two main theories to determine the theoretical value of a currency. The first is based on the interest rate parity and is called the UIP for uncovered interest rate parity. Actually, it's quite simple. If a country offers high interest rates, the investments in this currency are remunerative for international investors, and therefore, all things being equal, it supports the exchange rate. The other theory, used to determine exchange rates, is called the purchasing power parity, or PPP. Purchasing power parities are units of measurement that can be used to compare the purchasing power of different countries by eliminating differences in price levels between countries. In its most basic form, the PPP represents the price ratio in a domestic currency of a basket of goods and services, and we can then compare this in different countries. In its calculation, the PPP does not take into account the exchange rate, but only the cost of living in general through a basket of goods and services. To illustrate this PPP, The Economist newspaper invented the Big Mac Index, and it's become a global standard where we can compare the price of the famous hamburger in all of the countries in the world. Thanks to this parity, we can determine the theoretical exchange rate that would allow parity of purchasing power.